The light is gone by mid-afternoon. The ground is frozen so hard your digging stick just skids across it. Nothing is growing. Nothing has grown for 4 months. Nothing will grow for 4 more. And you are still alive. For most of human history, this was the real test. Not the hunt, not the predator. Winter, a long, dark, silent stretch of months where the world simply stopped producing food, and your body kept demanding it anyway. Modern life has erased this from your instincts. You live in a season-free bubble. Strawberries in January. Heat at the twist of a dial, light whenever you want it, but your ancestors spent tens of thousands of winters in a world where the sun disappeared early, the water turned solid, and the land offered nothing. So, what did they actually do all winter? The answer is stranger, more organized, and far more clever than you would guess. Start with the most basic problem. Heat. Your body is a tropical machine. You have almost no fur. You lose heat fast. Left naked in a cold snap, you are in serious trouble within hours. Which raises an obvious question. How did a hairless African primate end up living in Ice Age Europe? The answer is clothing. And we can actually date it in a way that sounds almost like a joke. In 2003, geneticists Ralph Kittler, Manfred Kayser, and Mark Stoneking studied lice. Specifically, they compared human head lice to human body lice. Body lice are a strange creature. They do not live on your body, they live in your clothes and only visit your skin to feed. That means body lice could not have existed before clothing existed. So the researchers measured how long ago the two lice species split apart and used that as a clock for the invention of clothes. Their estimate landed somewhere in the range of roughly 70,000 to 170,000 years ago. Later studies have shifted the numbers, and the technique has real uncertainty. But the core insight holds. Clothing is old enough to have carried your species out of the tropics. Draped hides, though, are not enough for a real winter. Ian Gilligan, an archaeologist at the University of Sydney who studies prehistoric clothing, has argued that surviving deep cold requires something more specific. Fitted clothing, layers, sealed cuffs, and closed seams that trap a pocket of warm air against the skin. Loose fur cloaks let heat escape. Tailored clothing does not, and tailoring requires a tool, the eyed needle. A sliver of bone or ivory with a hole drilled through one end so a thread can be pulled through a hide instead of just poked through it. Some of the oldest eyed needles ever found come from Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, dated to roughly 40,000 to 50,000 years ago. Think about what that object represents. Someone sat in the cold, in low light, and drilled a hole narrower than a grain of rice through solid bone, using stone. Not for decoration, for survival. And the proof that this technology worked is in a grave, at a site called Sungir, near the Russian city of Vladimir. Archaeologists uncovered burials from around 34,000 years ago. The bodies were covered in thousands upon thousands of tiny beads carved from mammoth ivory, around 10,000 of them across the burials. The beads were not scattered randomly. They followed lines across the shoulders, down the arms, around the ankles, across the top of the skull. Those lines are the ghost of clothing that rotted away. Fitted jackets, trousers, caps, footwear. Someone in Ice Age Russia was wearing a tailored, decorated, cold weather outfit, and someone carved 10,000 beads to make it. Now hold that image and ask the harder question. What did they eat? Because clothing keeps you from freezing. It does not keep you from starving. Winter is not just cold. Winter is an empty pantry. No fruit, no greens, no roots you can easily dig. The plants are dormant or dead, and the animals that remain are lean because they are starving too. That leanness is a bigger problem than it sounds. Your body cannot run on pure lean meat. If protein is the only thing you eat, your liver hits a ceiling on how much it can process, and you begin to sicken even while eating constantly. Arctic explorers described this condition, sometimes calling it rabbit starvation, because rabbit meat is so lean that a person can eat rabbit all day and still waste away. You need fat or carbohydrate, something to burn. So winter survival was not really about finding meat, it was about finding fat, which changes how you read the archaeology, the obsession with marrow, the smashed long bones at site after site, cracked open for the grease inside, the rendering of bone into fatty broth, the targeting of animals in autumn when they are heaviest rather than in late winter when they are skin and bone. Your ancestors were not hunting for calories in general. They were hunting for the specific calories that keep a body warm. And the smartest of them did not wait for winter at all. They planned for it. At Dolní Věstonice and the neighboring site of Pavlov in what is now the Czech Republic, people lived through Ice Age winters around 30,000 years ago. These were not desperate wanderers. They built structures. They used fire pits. They fired clay in kilns, making the oldest known ceramic objects in the world, including the small figure known as the Venus of Dolní Věstonice. And they left behind something even more revealing: impressions. The archaeologist Olga Soffer, working with James Ottavasio and David Hyland, examined tiny fragments of fired clay from these sites and found the pressed-in patterns of woven fiber, cordage, netting, basketry, textiles, roughly 26,000 years old, preserved only as a negative shape in baked mud. That single finding rewrites the picture. Nets mean you can catch small animals in quantity. Baskets mean you can carry a surplus. Cordage means bindings, snares, and containers. It means the autumn is not just a season. It is a harvest window, and everything gathered in it can be stored. Because that is the real answer to what your ancestors did all winter. They lived off autumn, dried meat, frozen caches buried in permafrost, which is essentially a natural chest freezer. Rendered fat, nuts, seeds. Later in prehistory, this becomes unmistakable. At a site called Dra in Jordan, Ian Cuyt and Bill Finlayson excavated purpose-built storage granaries dating to roughly 11,300 years ago. Structures raised off the ground with air circulating underneath to keep grain dry, and crucially, these were built before farming was fully established. Storage came first. The idea of saving food for the empty months predates the idea of growing it. So picture the actual day. You wake in darkness because the sun rose late. The fire has been kept alive all night by someone taking a turn. You are wearing layers sewn with a bone needle. There is no field to work, no herd to move, no long march. You go out briefly, you check snares, you collect firewood, which is not a chore, but a full-time survival requirement. You come back before the light fails, and the light fails early. And then there are hours, long, dark, unavoidable hours with nothing productive to do. This is where winter becomes something other than hardship. This is where it becomes culture. The anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent decades among the Jew Huansi of the Kalahari, and she did something almost nobody had done. She compared what people talk about in daylight to what they talk about after dark. Daytime conversation was dominated by practical matters, complaints, land, disputes, logistics, but after sunset, around the fire, the content changed. Over 80% of firelit conversation was storytelling. Tales about distant relatives, ancestors, the spirit world, journeys, the past. Firelight does something to human talk. It stops being negotiation and starts being imagination. Now stretch that across a 4-month winter night. That is not downtime. That is the engine room of human culture. The dark half of the year is when the stories were told, the songs were repeated, the myths were shaped, the maps of the landscape were passed into the next generation's memory. And the beads were carved and the needles were drilled and the figurines were sculpted. Some researchers have even proposed that the human body itself changed to cope with this season. In a controversial study, Antonis Bartsiokas and Juan Luis Arzuaga examined the roughly 400,000-year-old bones from Cima de los Huesos in Atapuerca, Spain, and argued that seasonal lesions in the skeletons resembled patterns found in hibernating mammals. Most specialists are unconvinced, and there are simpler explanations for those lesions. But the fact that the question is even askable tells you how brutal these winters were. Here's the twist. You probably assume winter was the season that nearly killed us. In truth, winter may be the season that made us. A tropical animal with unlimited food has no reason to plan, no reason to preserve, no reason to invent a container, a calendar, a needle, a story that has to survive 4 months of darkness intact. Winter is what forced the human mind into the future tense. It rewarded the ones who could imagine February while standing in September. Storage, textiles, tailoring, fire management, shared labor, oral tradition, time reckoning. Almost every one of those is a winter technology. And then look at yourself in the dark half of the year now. You feel slower, heavier. You want richer food, more sleep, dim rooms, the company of a few familiar people, the same old stories told again. You call it seasonal sluggishness and treat it as a flaw to be fixed with brighter bulbs and a stricter schedule. It is not a flaw, it is an inheritance. It is a body still running a program written over 100,000 winters, one that says, conserve, gather close, eat well, tell the stories, wait. The light is gone by mid-afternoon. And every instinct you have for what to do about it was handed to you by someone who survived it without a single thing you own.